Kelly, it was nice to formally speak with you. I know we've chatted on Twitter a bit, but hope you're doing well.
Doing well, and thank you for having me. Excited to get a chance to talk to you and talk about Spawnies today for sure.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about it as well. And I know this is your second year doing the Spawnies now, right?
Yep, this is our
Um,
second year. Yep.
Gotcha. So I imagine there's probably a lot of lessons learned from the first time last year that are gonna make this show even better. Could you talk about kind of doing it for the first time last year, figuring things out, and how it's gonna make this show better?
Yeah, last year was interesting. It was a really fun try at learning to get all the things together at once and then try to mash all those things together because you're not only formulating the idea of what you want the show to be, just in general, but then you're also trying to figure out and program manage all the layers that make a show, which is extremely hard. It is a lot more difficult than I expected. And it kind of gives you a lot of respect for the folks who've been doing this for a long time. I got a chance to host Dice a couple years ago for a couple of years and got a chance to peek behind the curtain of how that show gets made. And then you see how the Game Awards comes across every year. And that gives you some other motivation and some ways to kind of think about ways to piece together and plug some holes and some gaps that you might see. But I think I've learned a lot about not only what are some things that I think are missing from the award show kind of equation. It's given me more of an ability to kind of understand how to not only to pitch what I do with Spawn on Me, and we're reaching our tomorrow probably the 20th of January will be the 10th year of our show being
Oh,
in
happy
existence.
anniversary.
Thank you. And then you learn how to connect that also to a conversation of how do you pitch yourself and those things to sponsors and how do you connect with developers and how do you kind of bridge those gaps too. So there's a lot of lessons learned in the past year that I think this year are really coming to fruition with the show. And I think one of the biggest changes that has come from those learnings has been we went from, Rihanna Manuel Pena, who was my co-host last year and also this year. We were the ones picking the winners and nominees last year to now having our show be entirely fan voted and fan picked. So our nominees and our winners this year were all picked from our fan base and folks on the internet. So that was a huge change for what the show is going to be. And as you'll see when you see the show, some spicy picks got in there. Some names didn't make it into the hat, which is also kind of cool. So a lot of changes came from year one's learnings for sure.
That's interesting. Yeah, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, putting together any event, more so than you ever realize watching any sort of award show. But
Yeah.
something I like about the Spawnies is that it's a very more fun and kind of laid back vibe as opposed to a lot of our more traditional award shows in the gaming industry. And I think something fun that I love that you do with the awards is the subtitles for all of them. How they all have different like titles and names to them. I'm curious if you have like any insight to the decision to do that, or maybe it's what inspired you to do that. I love The Wiz, so I love Ease on Down the Road. It was
Yeah.
one you got on there. I'm curious if you could talk more about that.
It's really funny. So when my co-host, my former co-host Cicero Holmes and I started to kind of bridge together what the Spawnies was, because the Spawnies was very much a traditional kind of, podcast end of the year show formula that we did when we first started it, and we were like, what is the twist that we can put on this that makes it a little bit more fun, a little bit more us, and a little bit more kind of connected to Black culture in that way. And I was like, we have to throw in stuff that it doesn't become an inside joke when the community and the culture kind of understand it. So like you picking up on the Ease on Down the Road coming from the Wiz automatically makes that connective tissue make sense. The Snot Bubble Cry Award, there's multiple layers of that one. That was like, I remember the kid in the schoolyard when it was winter and he was the one kid who didn't have Vaseline on his face and had that one crusty snot bubble hanging out of his nose. But it was also like a meme that happened, which was like the ugliest cry, right? Though there was a meme that went along some years ago that was like, "Why don't you love me?" And then the dad would cry, and he had this really ugly cry. And then the 6 Million Ways to Die was like this really fantastic song that came out in the early '90s that was like a Funk Master Flex song, that came across in the hip hop space. So it's a lot of touch points back to black and brown culture, and especially hip hop culture is where a lot of these references come from. And it feels like, again, it feels more like us, and it feels like a way to connect to an audience in a way that is not just subverting what we see usually in the kind of bigger spaces, but also a wink and a nod to the folks who get it, right? It is definitely a if you know moment in the ways that we kind of put it together, for sure.
Yeah, I love it. It's really funny to me. I sent that one to my mom when I saw it because she loves awards too. And just cool having a black hosted award show in general in the gaming industry is very refreshing. I know that you said earlier you guys are doing full fan voting this year, which is always fun. When it's kind of a wild card when you let people vote from home on the stuff, as we've seen throughout the years. Are there any specific games that did or didn't make the list, or developers' performances that you were like, oh my God, I cannot believe this?
One did, and I think it's for our, I don't know if I want to give it away, but it's for a new category that we put in. We definitely put in 2 new categories this year. One was a fighting game category, because I'm a huge fighting game fan. And the other one was the, we call the Crystal Biscuit Award, which is kind of forecasting what is the most anticipated game of the coming year. And there were a couple of spicy takes in both of those categories, not only on the nominee side, but on the winner side for some of that stuff. And I think it's great because it winds up again showing, not only the breadth and depth of the space, because, the past four years or so, we've had not only just like a wild number of fantastic games, but they have been across so many different genres of games that it's been really nice to be able to say, oh, wow, the conversations that we see that get across the NPDs, especially because that information came out very recently, doesn't necessarily always correlate to what people are playing and what people think are dope. So it's like a real nice ability to see, not only how our fans are thinking about it and all the folks who voted, but it gives us another space to do a thing that I think a lot of bigger game award shows don't do, which is spotlight smaller games while not also, kind of giving all full space to kind of the big AAA and quadruple A games. So like, because of time constraints, God of War didn't make it into our show this year. Which is a huge thing when you think about how many awards that game has won over the year. Yeah. But because of the way we were trying to build this show, and for most folks who work in the industry might not know, towards the end of November and December, most studios close. They go away for vacation and they take a large break. And for me, as the person who's like trying to gather and herd cats and say, hey, can you send me an award speech? Or, hey, we want to ship you a physical award. I have to think about those things when we're thinking about nominees too. And how do you, which games get into the mix too within that space so that we can incorporate those folks into our show. So it winds up changing some of that. And I think for year 3, that'll also change a little bit too, because now we have some of those tools and infrastructure kind of built now. So those are a couple of things that were really interesting going into this year. We had over 3,000 votes for winners. Wow. Which was a number that, due to our technology partner in Grab Labs was really cool to see come through and be a part of our show this year.
That is dope. I know you guys had a lot of folks pop up to present awards and give speeches the last Spawnies, and you're gonna do it again this year. Do you have any like dream presenters? If you could just like snap your fingers to get one specific person on the show that hasn't done it yet.
Oh man, I mean, I'm a huge Ed Boon fan. Like if I were ever to get Ed Boon to do our the name of our fighting game category is "Be Water, My Friend," after the dope Bruce Lee quote. So getting Ed Boon on the show would be super cool. Of course, Reggie Fils-Aimé would be dope to be able to pull in fellow Bronxite on the show. There's a couple other folks within the space. I would love to get Chris Judge on the show to be able to present award. Just his voice alone, belting through would just be wild. I don't know. We'd have to cut him short after his speech on the Game Awards this year. But I think that's the thing, right? Is I think, with our aspirational goal of from the time that you start the show to the end of it, we have everyone that you see on camera, that you see during our show, be from an underrepresented group or someone who's from a marginalized group. Like that's a huge thing for me. And when we wind up getting some of the acceptance speeches back, the ask when I put out the call for those is like, if you have folks from these parts of the space in your studios, we want them to be the ones who accept these speeches for us. We don't necessarily want the kind of usual figurehead to be there. We want folks who are, in the trenches doing some of that work to be able to come to and be the folks that everyone at home sees, because that's kind of the still foundation of what we're trying to do with the show.
That's amazing. And I know since it was born during the pandemic, you got the at-home setup going for Spawnies. You do it all digitally. Have you ever considered trying to do like an in-person event with it, or do you think it's better served digitally?
I mean, the hope at some point is to make this a full live event. This year we were close this year, but we had some sponsors back out a little bit earlier in the development of the show. But like this year was going to be a hybrid show where we were going to do, the usual kind of digital setup. And then when we did last year, what we did for our breaks was I played a really horrible version of Pictionary that sent children running and other people crying. But it was great to be able to do that stuff. So we were going to supplant that this year with a live feed of some of the presenters who presented last year and the folks who were going to present this year. We were all going to hang out, do a watch party, and then we were going to, live mic talk to them and do some of that stuff. The hope in a couple of years is that this is a full red carpet event. We go somewhere, we rent out a stage somewhere and rent out a room and do it in that big way. And make that happen. And this year we have a couple of surprises when it comes to that, so that'll be pretty fun too.
Earlier, you mentioned that Spawn on Me, the podcast itself, is turning 10 years old this week. Could you just talk about the growth of the podcast over the years, and then specifically over the last few years? You've really evolved it. Spawnies becoming a thing certainly contributed to that, I imagine.
Yeah, the show was born from a lot of different things. I think thinking about Spawnies and Spawn on Me as a kind of a big umbrella, the show has always kind of been here to fill gaps in what we saw in the industry as things that were lacking for POC folks. And I think, especially having, done almost 500 shows now over the past 10 years, and we're coming up on it pretty soon. We'll hit that number this year. You learn a lot about what are some things that are missing from the equation, what are conversations that are missing from those equations, and then how do you kind of, talk to those in a way that feels smart and nuanced and reasonable and honest in a lot of different ways. I think a lot of conversations that we have on our show, you just don't get anywhere else because either people are scared or they don't have the language to speak to it in those ways, which has been nice to be able to see that happen. We did also get a lot of really good feedback from folks who were not only watching the show last year, but people who, behind the scenes would say, oh, wow, this is something that we haven't seen before, and how can we support it? Or, this is something that we want to kind of figure out how to incorporate into what we're trying to do too, whether it be, some program that they're working towards at their company, or some way that they have been thinking about, how to reach an audience that doesn't really get spoken to when it comes to Black and brown folks in the video game space. So it's been nice to see, folks like Xbox and Twitch this year kind of sponsor us, and then the folks from Zynga and their Black Dev Resource Group, they're also sponsoring us this year too. So it makes me feel like the show plus the podcast plus the show, both are kind of interweaving and interlocking into the space that feels like the message of what we're trying to do, and the North Star of that is reaching people in a way that it's taken a long time, but it feels good to know that people respect the work, they respect what I do, and they do want to see parts of it grow and continue to get bigger.
Yeah, it's very important that that's a big part of what you do, right? Highlighting Black voices, other folks of color in the gaming industry, very underserved voices. And of course, we're coming up on Black History Month. The profile pictures are going to be coming out very soon. I'm curious, what do you think are some of the biggest bullet points gaming industry needs to hit at large to kind of do better in regards to diversity, whether that be award shows, events, game development itself, press? if you have any insight on that.
I think there's a really interesting balance where you see a lot of folks like you just kind of hinted at, is we're about to see a whole bunch of fists in the air for Black History Month when it doesn't happen in the other 11 months of the year. And it's really interesting because I having worked in a couple of different capacities in the video game industry, I'm now currently a senior community developer or community manager at Firewalk Studios. But prior to that, I was in the DEI layover at Riot. And it was interesting because when we'd have conversations about like, how do we best serve these communities? We would do a lot of the head and heart work, right? And it's like, we should do this because you want to be a better company externally. You want to also signal to folks that you care about them and you want to do some of that work. And I think that's been a layer of the work that needs to be done. But I think in the bigger conversation, I think often about like, who are we as a people and what do we bring to everything, right? I think nothing moves without Black and brown folks. We are the first adopters to everything that's hot. We make everything hot. We make everything kind of move in a direction that brings visibility to not only our community, but to the way that we move and to the way that we do things. And I think from a non-head and heart perspective, you move into a conversation about what is the bottom line that we bring. And I think there is power in our collective dollar. And I think that there's a part of that conversation that is really important too, that I try to champion on the inside of every boardroom that I'm in, is to say both of those things at once, right? Is to say, yes, you should do this because this is a good thing to do and you need to do it. And to be fair, it's owed. And second, the conversations around gaming that are consistently brought up about like representation, about who do we market to, who do we speak to, who's on the front of the box, who are the folks who are making it, all the things on this hand never really get spoken about in a much broader tone. And I think those parts of the conversation are now some of the underlying conversation pieces that I would like to see in that space. So that goes back to even how do we talk about and how do we find out who is the gamer, right? When I was working at Intel, I put together alongside Newzoo, I kind of sparked the conversation that kind of came through the George Floyd killings that happened, and said, all right, so the gaming industry is starting to talk about us in a way that is not just about Black History Month. We sparked some of those conversations on Spawn on Me with our Less Than Blackness episode. And then I said, well, what happens if we as all of us collectively, and the hypothesis was to say, if we took the black dollar out of gaming for a year, what impact would that actually make, right? Because if you go to the C-suite and you say, hey, C-suite, we know that you're going to say that you care for another 30 minutes. And then the next 30 minutes, you're going to be like, no, well, they don't spend any money. Right. And I'm like, well, let's make the case for what that money, that monetary number is. And the findings in that were skewed because, to be fair, black and brown folks, when you roll up on them with a survey, most times they're like, what do you need that information for? Right. Which is also reasonable. Sure. So the numbers are skewed, but it came out to about $12 or $13 million a year. Right. I was like, that's got to be 4 or 5-fold. And then you pull in all the other ethnic groups, all the other representatives of different genders, and all the layers of all those conversations. And that number then becomes an astronomical number and a really impactful number that you can't deny that is missing every year, just because you're not specifically and directly talking to those folks. You're not making campaigns around them, you're not involving them in those campaigns. You're not thinking about them when you're making your product. So there's a lot of conversation there about like, how do you bridge those gaps in a way that is not only one that feels like it's for the culture in a way that you speak loudly, but actually has an impact on the way that people think about how you engage with an audience that is black and brown. And I think those are the ways that those conversations kind of bubble up for me of like, where are we at? What can we be doing better? And how do we also bridge those gaps that we see in a real, fundamental and impactful way for people where it actually matters?
That was very insightful stuff, man. Before I let you go, I have to ask, do you have any predictions for, I know you're about to go into your second Spawnies, do you have any predictions for the third next year, or just 2023 at large? Anything you want to get out there that you can look back on this a year from now and be like, I called it?
Oh man, I am the worst Nostradamus on the planet because I usually get those things wrong all the time. But things that I think will be smart to see. I think, and I hope, is that I hope creators of color really understand the weight that they have in the space. I think that's a big part of this, 12-year run that we've had, because I was doing, I was a blogger in the beginning layers right before Spawn on Me, and when we started some of this work. So I think the contents of color will have to really come to the forefront and say, this is what you owe, and this is what we bring. And we have figured out the monetary value of that, and really want to push that forward in a way that gives them more prominence. So it's not just what I like to call Negro Highlanderism, which is like there can be only one of us in a spot at a time. I think that's a part of that conversation. I do think that companies will start to bridge that gap a little bit better, because some of us are now getting into positions where we can make those cases in real ways, where we are the ones who have decision-making power, which I think is really important. And I think for the Spawnies, I think we'll get a little bit bigger. I don't want to push the boat too far in front of the cart in front of the horse too far yet, because you need money to make that happen. You need resources to make that happen. And a lot of this is run by just me with a 9-to-5 job and a show that I'm trying to figure out how to continue to keep moving. So I also have to try to keep myself in a good position so I can keep going. But I want the next layer of our show to be that thing where the biggest missing piece is that world premiere. You get a game that you've never seen before debut on our show, right? That's the biggest thing that I feel like we're currently missing. And I'm hoping that, if the numbers are good on this show, if we double the numbers we got last year, which was around 350,000 views just on Twitch alone, that we can potentially build that out and make the case for why you want to showcase a thing on our show alongside some of the other bigger shows too. So that's the hope, is that we get there this year, and that, the culture comes through and pulls itself in a good way.
Awesome stuff. Kahlief, awesome talking to you. If you want to shout out your platforms where folks can find you, the Spawnies.
Yes, please. If you want to come and hit me up and talk to me and tell me how much you are mad that God of War didn't get into the show this year, hit me up at Kahlief Adams on Twitter. At Spawn on Me is the Twitter feed for the show. We do our show live every Wednesday evening at 6 p.m. PST at twitch.tv/Spawn on Me. On January 30th, on 6 p.m. PST, is that where you will find the Spawnies going live at that same Twitch address. And yeah, please check out Spawn on Me. We'll be doing our thing for year 10 in a big way coming up this year. We're hoping to have our biggest year yet, so it'll be a lot of fun. So come and check us out when we do Spawnies with myself and Rihanna Manuel Pena, where we give you more of the culture that you need.